Number of primary care providers is closely associated with the overall health of the community. Fewer students choosing primary care, earlier physician retirements. Physicians are retiring earlier as they find the complexities and regulations more burdensome. Nurse practitioners and physician's assistants are also in short supply because that's part of the goal. You know, maybe we can use other providers. Doctors are expensive, takes a lot of time, use other providers, but there aren't enough of them either. So that's not going to be enough to prevent it. I gave the resource for that at the bottom. Next slide. They're projecting a shortage of physicians between 35,000 and 44,000 adult primary care physicians in 2025. So with population growth and aging, we'll increase the family physicians and general internist workloads by 29% during that same period. So shortfall, increased volume, coming problem. Next slide. Nursing, this is from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, has had the largest growth in new jobs available of any occupation. 581,500 new jobs. Hundreds of thousands of job openings to replace nurses who are leaving the occupation. There's a large retirement. The average age of nurses is high in our community and across the country. So employment's expected to grow by 22%. Huge need. Next slide. So what about locally? You know, do we reflect that? Here we are. We have multiple nursing schools, all of which have expanded their size and scope. We have the medical school. We have our residencies. Methodist has 47 open nursing positions, 87 other healthcare positions. Thank you to Methodist for providing that. They also have occupational therapy and other positions with a particular need for night shifts and hospital care. OSF hired over 300, mostly inpatient RNs, again, because of this tendency to turn over out of those high-intensity, 24/7, holidays included shifts. They have 65 open positions, and they have 18 open APN, the advanced practice nurses. That's one of the arguments in the workforce is that you'll replace doctors with APNs, but we can't find APNs. That's about 16% of their total positions are open because we don't have enough of those either. So whether you're talking nationally or locally, there is an impending sort of a crisis coming of enough healthcare workers compared to the rising demand. Next slide. So both locally and nationally, we're facing a major shortage of workers. We are working hard to increase the supply through education locally. About 60% of the primary care providers in both MMG, Methodist Medical Group, and the OSF Medical Group trained in UECOMP-sponsored residencies with either Methodist or St. Francis. 60% to your primary care providers in town. If you look at the nursing, many of the nurses working in our hospital trained in our schools. So this is a very important thing, training your own to stay here and work. But that's not going to be enough. So I'm not sure what the next step for that is because they're going to have to keep working on that. You know, better distribution, more effective use of providers is going to be necessary, meaning how do we get more efficient, how do we design our systems, but that also might be very difficult to accomplish. I think that's my next slide. Can you go forward one more and see? Last slide? Yes, must be. So thank you for your attention. I wish I had the solution. You know, we need the hard workers. We need the motivated individuals. We need to get people with science training that come out of the schools. Our students go out like to Quest and others to try and role model these as potential careers. But we only accept so many people to medical school. The debt of around $200,000 per student at graduation drives them to higher paying specialties. You know, our systems are not supporting what needs to accomplish, and some of that has to happen through national reform of the systems. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Sarah. Our next presenter is Mr. Jim McConaughey. Mr. McConaughey is the president and CEO of the Heartland Partnership, which is a family of companies including the Economic Development Companies for Central Illinois, or EDC, the Peoria Area Chamber of Commerce, Peoria Next, the Heart of Illinois Port District, called Transport, And these organizations serve as vehicles for promoting growth and prosperity in the Central Illinois region for which he is responsible. He is also a member of a number of community boards, like our other panelists, and I mention that because these are very busy people who also give their time to helping develop the quality of life in our community. With 20 years of experience, Mr. McConaughey experienced in economic development and downtown revitalization. He has become known and recognized for his business and entrepreneurial acumen. Mr. Jim McConaughey.
Good morning. I'm the last speaker. You know, I've been passionate about I'm a community guy, and I've been passionate about economic development and community development and workforce issues for my later part of the last 26-year career. And it's interesting to me, the workforce really hit home really hard in the last year. I've got a 20-year-old daughter who's a junior at Columbia, and I'm starting to think about that. So what are you thinking about doing? And she said, I don't know. So being a good dad, I didn't pursue it any further. But I did say, you know, your bedroom, we turned into the guest bedroom. I emphasize guest. So, you know, it's interesting. Also, my son is in high school. He's 17 or 16, and we had the conversation with him. Not that conversation. We had the conversation that said, you need to have, you know, son, you're 16, you need to get a job. And he said, why aren't we doing well, you know? And I said, no, your mom and I are doing fine. You're poor. It's interesting. Our community has got over 100,000 new people in it. So 400,000 folks in our population. In the last 10 years, 100,000 people have moved here. Nearly 25% of the population. So if you ask yourself who's living in all those houses out there, which are suburban neighborhoods throughout the community and adaptive reuse and existing apartment structures, it's people that have chosen to move here. And they moved here for a number of different reasons, but the primary driver has been jobs. And the job generation that has been going on in our marketplace is substantially different than we've experienced over the last 40 and 50 years. So let me just talk about, you know, we've actually been, not in this room, maybe some of you have been here 100 years ago, but the characteristics of what we're experiencing now in this evolution of change actually occurred in the first turn from the 19th to the 20th century. At that time, the Edisons and the Fords of the world were developing sight and sound characteristics. We're inventing radios, and we're inventing characteristics of phonographs and characteristics of photography. And so the world was actually a highly technical place. We're also building roads and road systems in which we were buying cars for the first time. We had trucks for the first times instead of wagons and burros. We had a broad range of technological innovation, and we built what was then and now the warehouse district. So for those of you that are familiar, the Adams Street corridor, the Washington Street corridor was our industrial driver. And there was a massive amount of jobs that were generated at that period of time. So very clever, innovative people discovered that corn grew abundantly in our region. It continued to grow and prosper in our marketplace. They knew that corn was always a commodity, so they did some really technical and innovative things. They fermented it and made whiskey. And that was a really desirable product. It was so desirable, in fact, that it propelled the Peoria marketplace for about 40 years into great prosperity. And for those of you that actually are historians or buffs in the region, you know that we were the Las Vegas of the developing 20th century. The characteristics of our Broadway and vaudeville type activities, and the characteristics of a river town with lots of activity was very forthright. Now I'm going to fast forward you a little bit to where we're at right now in the 21st century, which is actually equally as exciting. You know, we have a broad range of new technologies and innovation that occur in our marketplace. And the technologies and innovation are equally as significant as the sight and sound and the automotive and the crop production and the value add to those crop productions we've had in the previous century. Peoria Next is one of the small companies that is charged with trying to develop those areas of small business growth. It's cheaper, faster, better mousetraps. So all technology just does a product that is either cheaper, faster, or better. The characteristics of taking that to market is usually through innovation and technology. We're actually very good at that. We spend over $1.5 billion in our marketplace in technology to develop technical innovations and the characteristics of creating better, cheaper, faster mousetraps. But here's the big difference. For the last 50 to 70 years, we've become very accustomed to the idea that a manufacturing job or a job with a big corporation is a substantial job. It's a premium job. It's perhaps, in our mindset, the premium job. Of the 20% of our workforce that's moved here over the last year, 85% of them have moved into jobs that are in employee bases of 250 people and less. And 50% of them are in employee bases of 50 people and less. So small business growth is the new change in the way workforce development is actually operating. Now, I'm a dad. I just told you about my 2 kids, a 20-year-old and a 16-year-old. And if they came to me and said, Dad, I really want to be an entrepreneur, you know, it's somewhat irresistible to me to say, don't be ridiculous, go get a job at Caterpillar, get some of those good benefits. But really the fundamental nature of what's shifted in the last 20 years, particularly in our marketplace, is the entrepreneurial growth and the small business development throughout the region. Now, we've talked a little bit about the skill sets that you have to have when you're in a corporation. They can sort of slot you into a number of skills. If you look at Dr. Judy's charts, there's maybe 4 or 5 that you need to be really good at in order to be able to be successful in some of the larger corporations. When you're in a small business, you're taking out your own trash. You have to have an awful lot of skill sets that are broader in a range, particularly if you're an entrepreneur. And we talked about everybody being sort of their own CEO, but there are leaders of these companies that really need to have a broad range of skill sets that are different than what we've seen in previous years, where you could sort of fit into a slot through your leadership advance through a corporation and pretty much gold watch it out after 40 years. So there's another trend that's going on in addition to the fact that we have small business as a primary driver for economic development. Technology and innovation, the cheaper, faster, better mousetrap is very relevant to the overall economy. But this also is very frightening right now, where at least my father, who's 86 right now, worked with the same company for his entire career. He worked with a power company. What we're anticipating, I worked in a number of different careers. My son will probably work in, and my daughter will work in 7 different industries in somewhere around 10 different jobs over their 40 to 45-year career. So every 4 to 5 years, I'm not counting on this, but this is the statistics, they're going to be moving jobs, somewhat in different industries. And if you think about this as a sort of a terrifying fact of instability for what we knew, for where we're going, that lifelong learning aspect that many of the panelists and others have talked about is required for you to shift from one job to the next or one industry to the next. And in fact, of those 7 or 6 industries that my son or daughter are going to be involved in, 3 of those industries have not been invented yet. I'm going to pause for a minute. 3 of those industries don't exist. So 20 years ago, we didn't have a field called data mining. Google didn't exist in sort of direct advertising. The characteristics of sorting and selecting information has overtaken the library needs of collecting information. So the end game for us is there's a whole world, a whole century, 90 more years of activity that's going to occur that really revolves around new industry development, and we have to be very adaptive to that. So I want to close my comments with just sort of 2 areas. Peoria Next, Peoria in the marketplace is prepared for a global and an innovative and a very social economy. So we're talking to each other differently. We still break bread together. We still gather around the campfire here and have a conversation. We're going to continue to do that for a long period of time. But the 4th rail in marketing has been social, and the ability to get LinkedIn or to get on Facebook or to have those conversations is a dynamic that's not going away. We're very good at that in our local market. We've been innovative. We're starting to think about how to be entrepreneurs in our marketplace. And we're global. You've heard folks talk about how there's flags on the equipment as it goes along, so it reminds people on a daily basis